The summer of 1991 arrived in Oakwood Falls with relentless heat that seemed to bend the very air above the cracked asphalt of Main Street. Located in the shadow of the Appalachian foothills, the town of just over 12,000 souls had always prided itself on being the kind of place where doors remained unlocked at night, and children played unsupervised until the streetlights flickered on. It was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone else's business, or at least thought they did. The Wakefield twins, Ellie and Emma, had just turned 16 that June. Identical in almost every way, from the constellation of freckles across their noses to the auburn hair that fell in waves past their shoulders, they were fixtures in the community, known for their synchronized swimming achievements and the uncanny way they could finish each other's sentences. Even their parents, Robert and Catherine Wakefield, sometimes struggled to tell them apart, relying on the small birthmark behind Ellie's right ear as the only definitive identifying feature. On the morning of July 18, 1991, the twins rose early, as they always did. Their routine was well established: a 5-mile run along the perimeter of Lake Cromwell, followed by breakfast at Millie's Diner, where they'd split a stack of blueberry pancakes and plan their day. Security footage from the town's only bank would later show them jogging past at 6:37 a.m., matching purple headbands holding back their hair, their steps in perfect unison, as if choreographed. They were creatures of habit, Detective Harold Powell would later tell reporters, the weathered lines around his eyes deepening as he spoke. And that morning was no different. Except, of course, it was. By 8:15 a.m., the twins had finished their breakfast at Millie's. Waitress Doreen Fletcher, now in her 70s but still sharp as a tack, remembers that final morning with remarkable clarity. They were excited about something, she recounted in a 2024 interview, her arthritic hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had long gone cold. Whispering and giggling, passing notes back and forth like they had some grand secret. I asked what they were up to, and Emma, I think it was Emma, said they were going on a treasure hunt. That's the phrase she used. A treasure hunt. What that treasure hunt entailed remains one of the central mysteries of the case. What is known is that the twins paid their bill in exact change, left their usual generous tip for Doreen, and exited the diner. The bell above the door jingled as they stepped out into the sweltering heat, the sound captured faintly on the security tape that would be reviewed countless times in the weeks to follow. They were never seen alive again. The Wakefield home sat on Sycamore Lane, a tree-lined street of well-maintained colonial houses with manicured lawns and American flags that snapped in the breeze. Robert Wakefield, an accountant at the local credit union, had left for work at 7:30 that morning. Catherine, a part-time librarian at Oakwood Falls High School, was enjoying her summer break and had plans to meet friends for lunch at the country club. I didn't worry when they weren't home for lunch, Catherine would later tell investigators, her voice hollow, eyes fixed on some middle distance. They were 16. It was summer. Sometimes they'd spend the whole day at the lake with friends and come home sunburned and hungry at dinner time. But by 6 p.m., with no word from either girl and their beds still neatly made from that morning, Catherine began making calls, first to their friends, then to the parents of their friends, then to her husband at his weekly poker game. By 8:37 p.m., the first patrol car pulled into the Wakefield driveway, its lights cutting through the gathering dusk, casting alternating red and blue shadows across the white siding of the house. Officer Thomas Jenkins took the initial report, noting Catherine's increasing distress as she paced the living room, clutching the cordless phone so tightly her knuckles blanched white. Robert arrived minutes later, his face ashen, car keys still dangling from his trembling fingers. "It's not like them," he kept repeating, a mantra that would echo throughout the investigation. "It's just not like them at all." What followed was the largest search operation in Oakwood Falls history. By dawn the next morning, volunteer groups had assembled in the high school gymnasium. Maps were distributed, areas assigned, and search parties dispatched throughout the town and surrounding woodland. The lake was dragged, abandoned buildings checked and rechecked. Flyers with the twins' smiling faces appeared in every shop window and on every telephone pole. The case quickly captured regional attention. By the third day, news vans from Pittsburgh and Cleveland had descended on the small town, their satellite dishes rising above the police station like strange mechanical flowers. The headline was irresistible. Twin teenagers vanish without a trace in sleepy mountain town. Detective Harold Powell, then 42 and the department's most experienced investigator, was assigned as lead on the case. A methodical man with a reputation for thoroughness, Powell approached the investigation with what his colleagues described as relentless precision. "We start with what we know," Powell told his team during their first briefing, his gravel voice carrying across the station's conference room. Two teenage girls, physically fit, well-adjusted, no known enemies or troubles. They leave a diner at 8:22 a.m. on a clear summer day and simply disappear. The initial theories were predictable. Voluntary runaway, abduction by a stranger, abduction by someone known to the girls. Each avenue was pursued with equal vigor, but each led to the same frustrating dead end. The twins had taken nothing from their rooms, no clothes were missing, no money withdrawn from their modest savings accounts. Their passports remained in the family's fireproof safe, untouched. Their diaries, identical purple notebooks with small brass locks, offered no clues. The last entries, dated July 17th, mentioned an upcoming swim meet and complaints about summer reading assignments. Nothing to suggest unhappiness at home. No mention of plans to leave. No hint of fear or trouble on the horizon. Friends described the twins as popular but not party girls, focused on their swimming careers and harboring ambitions of athletic scholarships. Both had steady boyfriends, Ellie dating Michael Thompson, the junior class president, and Emma seeing David Crenshaw, a quiet boy from the debate team. Both boys were devastated by the disappearance and both had solid alibis for the morning in question. A crucial break seemed to come on day 5 of the investigation, when Liam Henderson, a mechanic at Gordon's garage, came forward with information. He claimed to have seen the twins walking along Route 17 around 9 a.m. on the day they vanished, headed toward the old Millbrook Bridge that spanned the Cromwell River at the town's northern edge. They were walking with purpose, Henderson told Detective Powell. Had backpacks on, which I thought was odd in that heat. They didn't thumb for a ride or nothing, just kept their heads down and marched like they had somewhere important to be. This sighting, if accurate, provided a direction of travel that had not yet been thoroughly explored. Route 17 led away from town toward the abandoned Millbrook Mill, once the economic heart of the region, but shuttered since 1983 when operations moved overseas. The mill and surrounding buildings stood like decaying sentinels over the river, broken windows and crumbling brick, a testament to economic devastation that had swept through much of rural America. Search efforts redirected to this area, with K-9 units brought in from the state police. The dogs picked up a scent trail that followed Route 17 to the bridge, but the trail ended abruptly mid-span, as if the twins had simply vanished into thin air. Water searches below the bridge yielded nothing. The abandoned mill complex was searched extensively, every floor, every room, every shadowed corner. Dust lay undisturbed in most areas, with no signs of recent human presence. Local teenagers were known to occasionally use the site for parties or as a place to drink beer away from adult supervision, but the only evidence of this was months old, judging by the collection of faded beer cans and cigarette butts found in what had once been the manager's office. As days turned to weeks, the investigation began to lose momentum. Leads dried up, witnesses with potential information failed to materialize, and the Wakefield case file grew thick with reports that essentially documented the absence of evidence rather than its presence. The media attention, initially intense, began to wane as well. News vans departed one by one, returning to cover more immediate tragedies, leaving behind only local reporters to mark the grim milestones. 1 month missing, 2 months missing, 100 days. Catherine and Robert Wakefield appeared on several national television programs, their grief etched deeply into their faces as they pleaded for information, for witnesses, for their daughter's safe return. A reward fund, started by the local Rotary Club, eventually grew to $50,000, but generated more false leads than actionable intelligence. By the end of 1991, the active investigation had been scaled back. Detective Powell, though still officially assigned to the case, had been forced to turn his attention to other crimes. The Wakefield family had begun the agonizing process of adjusting to a new normal, a life defined by absence, by questions without answers, by hope that gradually morphed into a different kind of pain. The not knowing is the worst part, Catherine told a local reporter on the one-year anniversary of the disappearance. If they are gone, let us bury them. If they are out there somewhere, let us find them. This limbo is unbearable. The case grew colder as the years passed. The Wakefield twins became part of local law, their story told to teenagers as a warning about the dangers that might lurk in even the safest of communities. Their senior yearbook in 1993 featured 2 empty pages with only their names and the dates of their birth, a silent memorial to what should have been. In 1996, Robert Wakefield suffered a massive heart attack while driving home from work. His car veered off Sycamore Lane and struck an oak tree at low speed. Though the accident itself was minor, the heart attack proved fatal. Many in town whispered that he had died of a broken heart, the stress and grief of his daughter's disappearance finally extracting its ultimate toll. Catherine soldiered on alone, converting the twins' bedroom into a kind of shrine. Their swim trophies remained on shelves, gathering dust. Their clothes still hung in the closet. Their matching teddy bears sat side by side on beds that would never again be slept in. She refused to leave the house on Sycamore Lane, telling friends she needed to be there when the girls came home, not if. Detective Harold Powell retired from the Oakwood Falls Police Department in 2007 after 30 years of service. At his retirement party after the speeches and the presentation of a gold watch, he pulled the new chief aside and made him promise that the Wakefield case would never be classified as closed. "Those girls are still out there," Powell insisted, his voice slightly slurred from one too many whiskeys. "And somebody knows something." The case file, by then nearly 16 years old, was transferred to the department's cold case unit, which consisted of a single part-time detective who divided his attention between a dozen unsolved mysteries. Every few years, usually around the anniversary of the disappearance, the local paper would run a story. New age progressed photos of the twins would be circulated, and a brief flurry of tips would come in, each investigated and ultimately discarded. Catherine Wakefield passed away in 2012 from breast cancer, her final years spent in increasing isolation as she withdrew from community life. In her will, she left the house on Sycamore Lane to her sister Judith Harmon, with specific instructions that the twins' bedroom remain untouched until they return home. Judith, who lived in Arizona, had no desire to relocate to Oakwood Falls or maintain the property. After a respectful period of mourning, she listed the house for sale in early. It languished on the market for months, potential buyers put off by both its dated interior and the macabre history that clung to it like a shadow. Eventually, the price was reduced significantly, and in November 2013, the house was purchased by a young couple from Pittsburgh, Megan and Andrew Carpenter, who saw it as an affordable opportunity to escape city life and raise their infant son in a quieter environment. They were aware of the house's history, but, not being natives of Oakwood Falls, viewed it with a certain detachment. "We knew about the twins," Megan would later tell investigators. "But it was 22 years ago. A tragedy, of course, but we didn't feel haunted by it, I guess. We just saw a nice house that needed some updating in a good school district." The Carpenters set about renovating the property, replacing the outdated kitchen, refinishing hardwood floors, and painting over the pastel wallpaper that had been stylish in the late 1980s, but now appeared hopelessly dated. The only room they left relatively untouched was the attic, which they used primarily for storage of holiday decorations and outgrown baby items. Life proceeded normally for the family over the next decade. Their son, Jackson, grew from infant to elementary school student. Megan, a graphic designer who worked remotely, established her home office in what had once been the twins' bedroom, while Andrew commuted 3 days a week to his job as an IT specialist in Pittsburgh, working from home the other 2 days. They integrated well into the community, though they occasionally noticed how conversations would sometimes halt when they entered local establishments, or how older residents would give their house a wide berth when walking past. The Wakefield case had never been forgotten in Oakwood Falls, and the house on Sycamore Lane remained, in many minds, a place marked by tragedy. On a rainy Saturday in April 2024, 33 years after the twins' disappearance, Andrew Carpenter decided to finally address the home's aging roof. Several leaks had developed during the spring storms, and water stains were beginning to spread across the ceiling in the upstairs hallway. He accessed the attic through the pull-down ladder in the hall, armed with a flashlight to locate the source of the leaks. The attic was cluttered but not chaotic. Plastic bins of Christmas ornaments, old baby clothes, college textbooks the couple couldn't bear to part with but never opened. Andrew moved toward the far end of the space where water had pooled on the plywood flooring. As he examined the roof joists above, his flashlight beam caught something unusual in the farthest corner of the attic, partially concealed behind a chimney that ran up through the center of the house. What he initially took for a bundle of old blankets revealed itself, upon closer inspection, to be something else entirely. Something that made his blood run cold in his veins, that caused him to stumble backward, nearly falling through the attic access in his haste to retreat. At 1:47 p.m., the Oakwood Falls emergency dispatch received a call from a breathless Andrew Carpenter. "I need police at 47 Sycamore Lane," he told the dispatcher, his voice trembling. "Right away, I found something in the attic. Something that shouldn't be there." When Officer Jessica Mendez arrived 12 minutes later, she found Andrew sitting on the front porch steps, pale and visibly shaking despite the mild spring temperature. Megan stood beside him, one hand on his shoulder, their son thankfully away at a friend's birthday party. "It's up there," was all Andrew could manage, pointing toward the house. "In the attic, behind the chimney." Officer Mendez, a recent academy graduate on one of her first solo calls, approached the situation with by-the-book caution. She requested backup before entering the house, then made her way upstairs, her hand resting instinctively on her holstered weapon. The beam of her flashlight cut through the dim attic space as she followed Andrew's directions to the chimney at the far end. What she discovered there would break open a case that had haunted Oakwood Falls for over 3 decades. Carefully positioned behind the brick chimney, hidden from casual view, sat 2 identical backpacks, faded purple with white geometric patterns, typical of early 90s fashion. Beside them lay a camera, an old-fashioned disposable Kodak, with most of its exposures used, its plastic yellow body dusty but intact. But it was what lay beneath these items that caused Officer Mendez to radio for immediate assistance, her voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her system. There, arranged with an unnerving precision, were 2 human skulls, facing each other as if in eternal conversation. Beside each skull lay a small collection of personal effects: a purple scrunchie, a high school class ring, a thin silver bracelet with a heart-shaped charm. And between them, its pages yellowed and warped with age but still legible, lay a spiral-bound notebook. On its cover, written in fading blue ink in a careful teenage hand, were 5 words that would launch the most intensive investigation Oakwood Falls had seen since the summer of the truth about what we found. Within hours, the house on Sycamore Lane was transformed into a crime scene. Yellow tape cordoned off the property, and a procession of police vehicles, crime scene technicians, and, eventually, the county medical examiner's van lined the quiet street. Neighbors gathered in small clusters on lawns across the way, sharing theories and memories in hushed voices as rain continued to fall in a gentle mist. Detective Leanne Ortiz, head of Oakwood Falls' now expanded cold case unit, arrived on scene at 3:15 p.m. A 20-year veteran of the force, Ortiz had been a rookie patrol officer during the original Wakefield investigation. Now, as she stood in the attic where Andrew Carpenter had made his grim discovery, she felt an eerie sense of time collapsing in on itself. "Get Powell on the phone," she instructed a younger detective, referring to the long-retired investigator who had led the original case. "He needs to be here for this." As the skulls and artifacts were carefully documented and removed for forensic analysis, Detective Ortiz turned her attention to the notebook. Following proper evidence protocols, she donned gloves before gently opening the cover to reveal the first page. There, in the same careful handwriting, was a single sentence that sent a chill through everyone present. "If you are reading this, it means we never made it out alive." The spiral notebook, its cover warped by decades of attic heat and humidity, became the focal point of the renewed investigation. Detective Ortiz supervised as it was carefully photographed in place, then sealed in an evidence bag for transport to the forensic lab. The medical examiner made preliminary notes on the skulls, confirming they appeared consistent with teenage females who had died in the early 1990s, though formal identification and cause of death determination would require laboratory analysis. Within 2 hours of Andrew Carpenter's discovery, Harold Powell arrived at the scene. The former detective, now in his mid-70s, moved slowly up the front walk of 47 Sycamore Lane, leaning heavily on a wooden cane, his face more lined than when he'd worked the case, but with the same penetrating eyes, betrayed little emotion as Officer Mendez lifted the crime scene tape to allow him access. "Never thought I'd be back here," he murmured, gazing up at the house that had featured in his dreams and nightmares for over 3 decades. "Never thought it would end like this." Detective Ortiz met him in the foyer, extending her hand with a mixture of professional respect and genuine empathy. "Thank you for coming, Detective Powell." "Harold," he corrected her, his voice a gravelly whisper that spoke of too many cigarettes over too many years. "I haven't been detective since before you made sergeant." Together they ascended the stairs, Powell taking each step with deliberate care, refusing offers of assistance. In the attic, now brightly illuminated by crime scene lights, he stood silent for a long moment, taking in the scene where the twins had apparently been hidden all these years. "They were here," he finally said, a statement rather than a question. "Right here the whole damn time." While the physical evidence was being processed at the county lab, attention turned to the notebook. Under controlled conditions at the station, Detective Ortiz and a document specialist carefully separated the delicate pages, photographing each before proceeding to the next. What emerged was a journal, primarily written in Ellie Wakefield's hand, that detailed the events leading up to the twins' disappearance and apparently their deaths. The journal began 3 weeks before their disappearance. On June, "Emma found something today while we were exploring the old mill. At first, we thought it was just trash, some old papers stuffed inside a rusty metal box. But it's so much more than that. We didn't have time to look through everything. So we resealed the box and hid it behind the loose bricks in the south wall. We are going back tomorrow with flashlights and Emma's camera. This could change everything." Subsequent entries described the twins' clandestine return visits to the abandoned Millbrook Mill, each time removing a few documents from the mysterious box to study at home, then returning the box to its hiding place. The writing conveyed escalating excitement tinged with growing fear. July 3, the documents mention something called Project Nightshade. There are financial records showing massive payments to someone identified only as the facilitator. We are talking hundreds of thousands of dollars in 1983 money. This is big, really big, but we don't understand everything we are seeing. July 8. Emma thinks we should tell someone what we found. I'm not sure. These papers mention Mayor Fletcher's father by name, and Dr. Holloway from the hospital, and other people who still live in town. Important people. What if they don't want this information getting out? July 12. Someone was watching the mill today. A black car parked across the river. When we left, it followed us for 3 blocks before turning off. Just a coincidence? Emma says I'm being paranoid, but I'm not so sure. July 15. We have decided. We are taking everything to Mr. Phelps at the newspaper on Friday. He seems like the only adult we can trust with this. 3 more days of keeping this secret, then it's not our problem anymore. The final dated entry was from July 17, the day before their disappearance. Tomorrow morning, after breakfast at Millie's, we are going to get the box one last time and take everything straight to the newspaper office. Emma doesn't want to tell Mom and Dad until after we have talked to Mr. Phelps. She's worried they will try to stop us, tell us it's not our business. But finding those documents made it our business. The people of this town deserve to know the truth about what happened at Millbrook. The remainder of the journal shifted to a real-time account, undated but clearly describing the twins' final day. The handwriting became increasingly hurried and erratic as the narrative progressed. We got the box from its hiding place, but someone else was at the mill. We heard voices as we were leaving, men arguing about something. We hid behind the old boiler room and saw them, Mayor Fletcher and Chief Grant. The chief had his gun out, not pointing it at the mayor but holding it like a threat. They were too far away to hear clearly, but we caught words like payment and evidence and shut down. We waited until they left, then ran all the way to the bridge with the box. Change of plans. We are going home first to hide the box, then going to Mr. Phelps. Safety precaution. If something happens, at least the evidence will be somewhere. We are taking the path along the river to avoid being seen on the main road. The account continued, describing how the twins had taken the Riverside Trail, only to realize they were being followed by a dark sedan moving slowly along the parallel road. Fearing for their safety, they doubled back toward town, but then spotted Chief Grant's police cruiser parked at the trail entrance. Trapped, no way out except through the woods. We are going to cut through the Henderson property and circle back home. Emma says we are overreacting, but better safe than sorry. The next passage described a frantic trek through dense woodland, the twins becoming increasingly disoriented as they attempted to find their way back to familiar territory. Then, a chilling development. Gunshots, 2 of them, from the direction of the river. We are running now. No idea if they are shooting at us or someone else, but we are not stopping to find out. The final pages detailed how the girls eventually emerged from the woods near Sycamore Lane, approaching their house from the rear to avoid being seen from the street. They entered through the seldom-used basement door, its key kept hidden under a garden gnome. Home now. Parents not here. Going to hide everything in the attic behind the chimney, then figure out our next move. Emma wants to call the state police, but what if they are involved too? Who can we trust? The documents mention state officials as well. This goes higher than we imagined. The journal's last entry was incomplete, ending mid-sentence. Someone's downstairs. Heavy footsteps. Not Mom or Dad. They found us. We are hiding behind the chimney. Emma's crying. I told her to be quiet, but they must have heard because they are coming up the attic stairs now. If you are reading this, tell our parents. The abrupt ending left investigators with more questions than answers. If the twins had been killed in the attic, why was there no evidence of violence discovered when the Wakefields searched the house? Why had no one heard gunshots or screams on a summer day when windows would likely have been open? And most perplexingly, how had the bodies remained undiscovered through decades of police searches, a change in ownership, and multiple renovations? Forensic analysis of the skulls confirmed what everyone had already suspected. They belonged to Ellie and Emma Wakefield. Dental records provided a definitive match. More disturbing were the medical examiner's findings regarding cause of death. Both skulls showed evidence of a single gunshot wound, precise and professionally executed. These weren't random killings or crimes of passion. Dr. Yvonne Liang told the assembled investigators 3 days after the discovery. Both victims were shot once in the back of the head, execution style. The wounds are nearly identical in placement. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. Further examination of the attic space yielded additional evidence. Behind a section of insulation near where the skulls had been found, crime scene technicians discovered a rusted metal box. Inside were dozens of yellowed documents, mostly financial records and meeting minutes from Millbrook Manufacturing dated 1982-1983, the year before the mill closed. While investigators pored over these recovered documents, Detective Ortiz focused on tracking down the key players mentioned in the twins' journal. Many were deceased. Mayor Fletcher had died in 2001. Police Chief Grant in others had moved away from Oakwood Falls as the town's economic fortunes declined through the 1990s. One name, however, stood out: Lawrence Phelps, the newspaper editor the girls had planned to meet. Now 78 and living in a retirement community in Florida, Phelps agreed to a video interview with Ortiz and Powell. "I remember those girls," Phelps said, his image pixelated on the precinct's outdated monitor. Smart as whips, both of them. They'd written for the school paper, occasionally submitted community interest pieces to the Gazette. Good writers. But no, they never came to see me that day. I was in the office all morning, waiting for an interview that never happened. By afternoon, the whole town knew they were missing. When shown photos of the documents recovered from the attic, Phelps's demeanor changed visibly. His face paled, and he removed his glasses to rub his eyes before responding. "I have seen papers like these before," he admitted reluctantly. "Not these exact documents, but similar ones. In late '83, right before the mill closure was announced, an anonymous source left a package at the Gazette office. Financial records, internal memos, that sort of thing. They suggested the mill wasn't closing due to foreign competition like the official story claimed, but because of something else, something bad. When pressed on what something bad might have been, Phelps became evasive. "Look, I never published that story. The day after I received those documents, 2 men visited me at the Gazette. One was Chief Grant. The other never identified himself but wore an expensive suit and spoke with the kind of authority that doesn't come from a small town. They explained that publishing anything from those documents would constitute a threat to national security. The mill had apparently been involved in some classified government contract work. That's all I know." This new information sent investigators digging into the history of Millbrook Manufacturing. Established in 1923 as a textile mill, it had pivoted to metal fabrication during World War II and continued government contract work through the Cold War. Most records indicated it produced specialized aluminum components for aircraft, but specific details about its operations in the early 1980s remained elusive. Meanwhile, forensic analysis of the attic continued. Luminol testing revealed trace evidence of blood spatter on the underside of the roof joists, invisible to the naked eye but glowing faintly under ultraviolet light after decades. The pattern suggested the twins had indeed been killed where their remains were found, likely while huddled behind the chimney as described in their final journal entry. Most puzzling was how the bodies had remained hidden. Detective Powell, who had personally searched the Wakefield house multiple times in 1991, including the attic, struggled with this question. "We were thorough," he insisted during a case review meeting, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he sipped from a styrofoam coffee cup. "We brought in dogs. We checked every inch of that house. There's no way we missed 2 bodies in the attic." The answer came from an unexpected source. Andrew Carpenter, returning to the house to retrieve essential items while the investigation continued, noticed something about the attic's construction that had escaped attention. The chimney, which appeared to be a single structure, actually consisted of 2 adjacent flues. Between them was a narrow space, accessible only if one knew exactly where to look. "It's almost like a priest hole," Carpenter explained to Detective Ortiz, referring to the hidden chambers built into some houses during periods of religious persecution. "You can only see it from a certain angle, and only if you are looking for it. This hidden compartment, barely 3 feet wide, but extending the full height of the house would have been large enough to conceal two bodies. The entrance was disguised as part of the chimney's brick facing, distinguishable only by the slightly different mortar color that had faded to match over decades. Someone with knowledge of the house's construction would have known about this space, Ortiz theorized, and someone with reason to hide the bodies would have used it. The investigation now turned to the history of the house itself. Built in 1937 by Joseph Wakefield, Robert's grandfather, it had remained in family hands until Catherine's death. County records showed that Joseph had worked as a master mason for several years before opening a hardware store that eventually grew into a modest local chain. He would have had the skills to create such a hidden space, though his reason for doing so remained unclear. A potential answer emerged when researchers uncovered newspaper articles from the 1930s mentioning Joseph Wakefield's involvement with local rum-running operations during Prohibition. The hidden compartment may have originally served as a place to conceal illegal alcohol, then been forgotten by subsequent generations until someone with knowledge of its existence utilized it again for a more sinister purpose. But who had killed the twins and hidden their bodies with such precision? And why, after decades of successful concealment, had the remains been moved from the hidden compartment to behind the chimney where Andrew Carpenter found them? Forensic entomologists examining insect evidence suggested the bodies had been relocated relatively recently, perhaps within the past year. This timing coincided with a significant event, the death of Thomas Grant, the former police chief mentioned in the Twins' journal, who had succumbed to pancreatic cancer in May. Maybe whoever moved the bodies didn't have to worry anymore after Grant died, suggested a young detective during a briefing. Maybe he was the one who needed them hidden. Harold Powell shook his head at this theory. Grant was a lot of things: stubborn, old school, politically motivated, but I never pegged him as a killer, especially not of two teenage girls. The documents recovered from the metal box provided the next breakthrough. While most were financial records showing routine business operations, several detailed a project codenamed Nightshade. These documents describe the repurposing of certain mill facilities for specialized material processing under Department of Defense oversight. Most concerning were environmental assessment reports showing dangerous levels of chemical contamination in soil samples taken near the mill's outflow pipes where they emptied into the Cromwell River. One internal memo, dated March 1983, was particularly damning. Continued leakage from holding tank B presents an unacceptable risk of public exposure. Tests confirm concentrations exceeding safety thresholds by factor of 85 BIB. Local water table showing preliminary indicators of contamination. Recommend immediate shutdown of Nightshade operations and implementation of containment protocols per DoD directive. A handwritten note in the margin read simply, "Denied. Continue operations through Q3. Containment too costly. J." The initials matched those of James Fletcher, who had served as both mill manager and mayor of Oakwood Falls during this period. They were poisoning the water, Detective Ortiz realized as the implications became clear. Some kind of classified chemical work that was contaminating the groundwater, and they covered it up instead of fixing it. This theory was bolstered by health statistics. Detective Ortiz subpoenaed from the county medical office. Oakwood Falls had experienced statistically significant increases in certain rare cancers and birth defects throughout the 1980s and early 1990s, including Catherine Wakefield's eventually fatal breast cancer. A cluster of cases centered around neighborhoods drawing water from wells near the Cromwell River downstream from the mill. The twins stumbled onto evidence of environmental crimes that affected hundreds of lives. Ortiz summarized during a case briefing. They planned to expose it all. Someone connected to the mill or the cover-up couldn't let that happen. But who had pulled the trigger? And who had moved the remains decades later? A partial answer came from fingerprint analysis of the metal box. Though most prints had degraded beyond recognition over 30 years, one partial thumbprint remained legible on an interior metal clasp. When run through the national database, it returned a match. William Grant, son of former police chief Thomas Grant. William Grant, now 61, had followed his father into law enforcement, serving with the Oakwood Falls Police Department until 2013, when he retired as a lieutenant. He still lived on the outskirts of town, in the same house where he had grown up, caring for his father during the elder Grant's final illness. When Detective Ortiz and two uniformed officers arrived at Grant's residence to question him, they found the house empty but recently occupied. Dirty dishes sat in the sink, mail was stacked on the counter, but William Grant was nowhere to be found. His car, a black 2020 Ford Taurus, was missing from the garage. A neighbor reported seeing Grant loading suitcases into his car the previous evening, said he was going fishing up at Lake Erie for a few days. The neighbor recalled, "Didn't think anything of it. Bill goes fishing this time every year." An APB was issued for Grant's vehicle, and his financial records were subpoenaed to track recent transactions. His credit card had been used that morning at a gas station near the Pennsylvania-Ohio border, suggesting he was indeed heading west toward Lake Erie, or perhaps beyond, to potential escape across state lines. Meanwhile, the forensic analysis of the disposable camera found with the skulls had been completed. Though most of the film had degraded beyond recovery after 3 decades, 2 images had been successfully developed. The first showed Emma Wakefield standing beside the exterior of the Millbrook Mill, pointing to a rusted outflow pipe that emptied into the river. The second, partially damaged but still discernible, captured a meeting in what appeared to be an office. Through a window, 3 men could be seen: Mayor Fletcher, Police Chief Grant, and a third man whose face was partially obscured but wore what appeared to be a military uniform with colonel's insignia. The girls had photographic evidence linking local officials to whatever was happening at the mill, Detective Ortiz noted. That, combined with the documents, would have been enough to launch a serious investigation. The investigation took a dramatic turn when William Grant's Ford Taurus was located in the parking lot of a small regional airport, 40 miles from Oakwood Falls. Security footage showed Grant boarding a private plane that had departed for the Cayman Islands 3 hours before police arrived. "He's running," Powell stated flatly when informed of this development. "Innocent men don't flee to non-extradition countries." A search warrant for Grant's residence yielded the final pieces of the puzzle. In a locked gun safe in the basement, investigators discovered a .38 caliber revolver that ballistics experts would later confirm was consistent with the wounds found on the twins' skulls. More damning was a journal hidden inside a hollowed-out book on Grant's bookshelf. The journal, written in Thomas Grant's distinctive handwriting, detailed decades of guilt and paranoia. "William says it was necessary. Says the girls would have destroyed everything, the town, our reputations, his future. Says I should be proud. He protected the family. Proud. My son executed 2 16-year-old girls and hid their bodies in their own house, and I helped cover it up. What kind of monster have I raised? What kind of monster have I become?" Later entries described Thomas Grant's deteriorating health and increasing desire to confess as death approached. "Told William today, I can't take it to my grave. The Wakefield girls deserve justice. Their parents deserved answers. William flew into a rage like I have never seen. Said if I talk, he goes to prison for life. Said he'd rather kill me himself than let that happen. My own son. May God forgive us both." The final entry, dated just 2 weeks before Thomas Grant's death, provided the explanation for the body's relocation. "William came by tonight. Said he's taking care of everything so I can die in peace. Wouldn't explain what that means. I'm afraid he's going to move the bodies, make them someone else's problem. Told him it's too late. I have written everything down. Left instructions with my lawyer for after my death. He just smiled that cold smile he has now and said, 'No one will believe a dead man's confession without bodies, Dad. I don't recognize my boy anymore. Haven't for 32 years. The lawyer mentioned in the journal entry. When contacted by investigators, confirmed that Thomas Grant had indeed left a sealed envelope with instructions for it to be opened 1 year after his death. That date would have been May 18, 2024, just weeks away. William Grant's plan to relocate the remains had apparently been interrupted, perhaps by his own declining health, as telephone records showed several recent calls to oncology specialists, or perhaps by Andrew Carpenter's home renovation project that threatened to expose the hidden space behind the chimney. With this evidence in hand, international law enforcement was notified of William Grant's flight and suspected location. Cayman authorities agreed to cooperate in locating and potentially extraditing him to face charges in the United States. As the investigation continued to unfold, one final disturbing question remained. The journal had mentioned the facilitator, an unnamed figure who had received substantial payments related to Project Nightshade. This individual appeared to outrank even the mayor and police chief in whatever conspiracy had unfolded at Millbrook Mill. Their identity remained unknown, a shadowy presence potentially still at large, perhaps still wielding influence from the shadows. The case that had haunted Oakwood Falls for 33 years had finally broken open, but full resolution remained tantalizingly out of reach. As Detective Ortiz placed the twins' journal into secure evidence storage late one evening, she noticed something she had overlooked during earlier examinations. On the inside back cover, barely visible in the artificial light, was a small drawing, what appeared to be a military insignia alongside a sequence of numbers and letters that resembled a military service ID. She quickly cross-referenced this with the partially visible colonel in the recovered photograph. Though the man's face remained obscured, the insignia on his uniform matched the drawing in the journal. Armed with this potential identification, Ortiz initiated a search of military personnel records from the early 1980s, focusing on officers with connections to chemical weapons research or environmental testing. The search yielded a name, Colonel Vernon Drayson, formerly attached to a classified research division of the Army Chemical Corps. More disturbing than this identification was Drayson's current status. Far from being a historical figure from the past, Drayson had risen through the ranks after leaving active service, transitioning to civilian contractor work, and eventually founding Drayson Strategic Solutions, a private military contractor with government contracts worth billions of dollars. Recent photographs showed an aged but vigorous man in his 80s, standing alongside current political figures at fundraisers and military contract signings. The man who may have authorized the toxic operations at Millbrook Mill hadn't faced justice. He had prospered, building an empire on the foundation of whatever dark work had been conducted in that small Appalachian town. As Detective Ortiz stared at the image of Drayson shaking hands with a current cabinet secretary, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Harold Powell's name. "You need to come to the station," Powell said without preamble, his voice tense. "William Grant was just found in his hotel room in the Caymans." "They have arrested him?" Ortiz asked, already reaching for her car keys. "No," Powell replied after a pause. "He's dead, single gunshot to the head. The local police are calling it a suicide, but the hotel security cameras show someone visiting his room an hour before his body was discovered. A man in his 80s, well-dressed, entering with a keycard he shouldn't have had." Ortiz looked again at the photograph on her computer screen, at Colonel Vernon Drayson's cold eyes and practiced smile. "The facilitator," she whispered. "He's tying up loose ends, and we just became the next ones," Powell responded gravely. "Whatever the twins found in 1991, whatever they died for, it isn't over. Not by a long shot." The death of William Grant in a Cayman Islands hotel room marked a critical turning point in the investigation. What had begun as a cold case suddenly transformed into something far more dangerous, an active conspiracy with tentacles reaching into the highest echelons of power. Detective Leanne Ortiz found herself standing at the edge of a darkness that had swallowed the Wakefield twins 33 years earlier, now threatening to consume anyone who ventured too close to the truth. The Cayman authorities ruled Grant's death a suicide within 48 hours, citing the absence of forced entry and the presence of his fingerprints and only his fingerprints on the weapon. But Detective Ortiz wasn't convinced. The hotel security footage showing an elderly visitor shortly before Grant's death had been conveniently corrupted during transfer to Oakwood Falls Police Department, leaving only a grainy still image that could have been almost any well-dressed older man. "Too convenient," Harold Powell remarked when Ortiz shared this development. They sat in Powell's modest living room, having agreed that the precinct might no longer be a secure location for sensitive discussions. First the twins, then the father. After he threatens to confess, now the son when we are closing in. Someone's eliminating witnesses, Leanne. Someone with resources, Ortiz added, staring at her case notes spread across Powell's coffee table. Someone who can reach across international borders, corrupt digital evidence, and make murder look like suicide. Someone like Colonel Vernon Drayson. Powell's weathered face creased with concern. "If you are right about Drayson, we are dealing with a man who spent 40 years burying this secret. He won't hesitate to add 2 more names to his list, which is why we need insurance," Ortiz replied, her voice steady despite the implication of Powell's words. "I have made digital copies of everything: the twins' journal, Grant's confession, the Millbrook documents, and encrypted them with time-release protocols. If anything happens to either of us, the files go directly to the FBI, state police, and 3 different news organizations." Powell nodded slowly, a grim smile forming. "Always were smarter than me. So, what's our next move?" Their strategy unfolded over the following days with careful precision, while maintaining the appearance of a routine investigation into William Grant's involvement in the twins' deaths. Ortiz and Powell quietly pursued the Drayson connection through back channels and unofficial sources. A breakthrough came from an unexpected quarter. Judith Harmon, Catherine Wakefield's sister who had inherited the house after her death, contacted Detective Ortiz after learning about the discovery from news reports. Now in her 70s and battling early-stage dementia, Judith had been sorting through her personal affairs when she uncovered a sealed envelope from her sister. "Catherine gave this to me about a year before she died," Judith explained when Ortiz visited her Arizona home. "Said if anything ever happened to her, I should keep it somewhere safe. Said it was insurance, though she wouldn't explain what that meant. I almost threw it away when cleaning out her house, but something stopped me. Maybe it was her voice in my head, telling me it mattered." The envelope contained photographs, not the blurry, degraded images from the twins' disposable camera, but sharp, professional shots taken with a telephoto lens. They documented a meeting at the Millbrook Mill in spring 1983, showing James Fletcher, Thomas Grant, and Colonel Drayson gathered around an open car trunk filled with what appeared to be cash-stuffed duffel bags. Accompanying the photos was a handwritten note in Catherine's distinctive script. "Robert took these before we were married, when he was doing freelance photography for the Gazette. He never submitted them because Phelps killed the story about military contracts at the mill. We found them again when cleaning out the basement in 1992 after the girls vanished. Robert recognized one of the men as the same military officer who came to our house with Chief Grant the day after the girls disappeared, supposedly to assist with the investigation. That's when we knew who had taken our daughters, but we had no proof, only suspicion, and these photos that proved nothing on their own. We have lived with this knowledge, this poison, ever since. If you are reading this, I'm gone. Do what you think is right. Catherine." The revelation that Robert and Catherine Wakefield had suspected the truth all along, but remained silent out of fear or futility, added another layer of tragedy to the case. It also provided crucial corroboration of Drayson's involvement, connecting him directly to Oakwood Falls and the mill operation. Armed with this new evidence, Detective Ortiz made a carefully calculated decision. Rather than taking the information directly to her superiors or federal authorities, who might have unknowable connections to Drayson's extensive network, she reached out to an environmental crime specialist at the Justice Department whom she had worked with on a previous case, someone she trusted implicitly. This isn't just about two murders anymore, Ortiz explained during a secure video call. It's about decades of environmental contamination, cover-ups at multiple government levels, and ongoing corruption that's killed who knows how many people through cancer and other illnesses. We need someone with the resources to go after Drayson, but who won't be compromised by his connections. Within days, a joint task force was quietly assembled, combining resources from the Justice Department's Environmental Crimes Section, the FBI's Public Corruption Unit, and select members of the Oakwood Falls Police Department, operating under strict information compartmentalization to prevent leaks. The team established a secure operations center in a vacant insurance office 3 towns over from Oakwood Falls. Meanwhile, the story of the Wakefield twins' discovery had captured national attention. Media descended on Oakwood Falls once again, but this time the narrative centered on William Grant as the presumed killer, with his suicide framed as a final admission of guilt. This public-facing investigation provided cover for the task force's more sensitive work, keeping Drayson's name out of official statements. The task force's first priority was establishing the nature and extent of Project Nightshade. Researchers combed through declassified military records, EPA historical data, and archived satellite imagery of the Millbrook Mill during its final operational years. Chemical engineers analyzed water and soil samples from the Cromwell River watershed, while epidemiologists mapped cancer clusters and birth defect rates across 3 decades. A disturbing picture gradually emerged. Project Nightshade appeared to have been a classified program developing binary chemical agents compounds that become lethal only when mixed, allowing for safer transport and storage of chemical weapons precursors. The Millbrook Mill, with its existing metalworking capabilities and remote location, had been secretly converted to produce specialized containment vessels and mixing mechanisms for these agents. But something had gone wrong. Testing and production had contaminated the local water table with heavy metals and chemical compounds known to cause neurological damage, birth defects, and several rare cancers. When this contamination was discovered internally in early 1983, military officials faced a choice: implement an enormously expensive cleanup operation that would expose the classified program to public scrutiny, or cover up the problem and quietly shut down operations. They chose the latter, paying off local officials like Mayor Fletcher to maintain silence and orchestrate a plausible economic explanation for the mill's closure. Police Chief Grant provided security and ensured no local investigations threatened the narrative, and Vernon Drayson, then a rising star in military chemical research, had overseen it all as the facilitator referenced in the documents. The twins had inadvertently uncovered this decades-old crime, a perfect storm of government secrecy, corporate irresponsibility, and environmental catastrophe that had slowly poisoned their hometown. Their planned exposure threatened not just local officials but military and intelligence figures who had built subsequent careers on the foundation of Nightshade's officially successful research. As the investigation progressed, Detective Ortiz noticed subtle signs that their operation had been compromised. A task force member reported being followed on his drive home. The secure office experienced unexplained power outages. Harold Powell's home was broken into, though nothing was obviously taken. "He knows we are coming for him," Powell observed grimly after filing the break-in report. Drayson circling his wagons. The most alarming development came when Judith Harmon, still in Arizona, suffered an apparent stroke and was hospitalized. Her doctors found traces of an unusual toxin in her bloodstream, a compound that would have induced stroke-like symptoms, but left minimal evidence. She survived but remained in critical condition under protective custody. "We need to move faster," Ortiz urged during an emergency task force meeting. "Drayson's eliminating loose ends. We won't get many more chances." The breakthrough they needed came from a seemingly minor detail in the mill documents, a reference to off-site storage facility D37, where chemical components were apparently held before transport. Cross-referencing with county property records revealed a warehouse 20 miles from Oakwood Falls, purchased by a shell company in 1982 and still owned by a series of nested corporate entities that forensic accountants traced to Drayson Strategic Solutions. If the facility still contained evidence of chemical weapons precursors after all these years, it would provide the physical evidence needed to move against Drayson. A covert operation was planned to access the warehouse, with Ortiz insisting on leading the team despite the obvious danger. The Wakefield twins died because they were brave enough to seek the truth, she told Powell when he questioned her decision. I won't hide behind a desk while sending others to face the risks. The warehouse stood in an overgrown industrial park, its concrete walls weathered but intact, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with rusted barbed wire. Security cameras mounted at each corner suggested the site wasn't as abandoned as it appeared. The task force approached under cover of darkness, EPA credentials ready in case of security encounters. The exterior locks were modern, recently maintained, but yielded to specialized equipment. Inside, the warehouse appeared largely empty, its vast floor space covered in dust, except for a set of recent footprints leading to the far wall. Following these tracks, the team discovered a hidden elevator behind what appeared to be an ordinary electrical panel. This is it, Ortiz whispered as the elevator doors slid open. Whatever they were hiding, it's down there. The elevator descended nearly 60 feet into the earth, opening onto a brightly lit corridor that showed none of the decay evident above. Temperature-controlled storage rooms lined the hallway, each secured with both keypad locks and biometric scanners. Using equipment designed to bypass such systems, the team gained access to the first room. Inside, racks of metal containers stood in neat rows, each bearing hazard symbols and production dates from the early 1980s. The task force's chemical specialist examined one container through his protective gear. Binary VX precursors, he confirmed, his voice muffled by his respirator. Technically not illegal to possess in component form back then, but absolutely prohibited under current chemical weapons conventions, and definitely not something that should be sitting in an abandoned warehouse for 40 years. Room after room revealed similar contents: chemical components, specialized mixing devices, and technical documentation that outlined Project Nightshade in damning detail. In the final room, they found something even more significant: bound reports documenting the contamination of the Cromwell River watershed, complete with projected casualty figures and cost analyses comparing cleanup expenses to estimated wrongful death settlements. They calculated how many people would die against how much it would cost to fix the problem. Ortiz said, disgust evident in her voice as she photographed the documents. And they decided the deaths were cheaper. With this evidence secured, the task force withdrew from the facility, carefully covering traces of their entry. The materials they documented provided the foundation for federal warrants against Drayson and several surviving officials connected to Project Nightshade. But before these could be executed, an unexpected development forced their hand. Harold Powell, returning home from a doctor's appointment, found a plain manila envelope on his kitchen table inside a house that should have been securely locked. The envelope contained a single sheet of heavyweight stationery bearing an embossed military insignia. The message was brief but chilling. The Wakefield matter ends now. You have 24 hours to close the investigation, officially, citing William Grant as the sole perpetrator. After that, there will be consequences beyond your imagination. Some secrets must remain buried. Detective Powell, ask yourself if 2 dead girls from 3 decades ago are worth what will happen next. The note was unsigned, but its source was unmistakable. Powell immediately contacted Ortiz, who ordered protective details for everyone connected to the case and accelerated the timeline for Drayson's arrest. Warrants were finalized overnight, and a joint FBI-U.S. Marshals team was assembled to take Drayson into custody at his Virginia estate the following morning. But when federal agents arrived at the sprawling property before dawn, they found the gates unlocked and the security system deactivated. Vernon Drayson sat in his wood-paneled study, a glass of scotch in one hand and a service revolver in the other. Unlike William Grant, there was no question about Drayson's death being self-inflicted. He had recorded a video statement moments before pulling the trigger. The recording, secured by the FBI, revealed a man neither repentant nor defeated. His final statement acknowledged Project Nightshade and the regrettable incidents in Oakwood Falls, but framed them as necessary sacrifices for national security. He admitted to ordering the death of the Wakefield twins after learning they possessed documents that would have compromised critical military research and exposed methodologies still relevant to current chemical defense systems. "I make no apologies for my actions," Drayson stated in the recording, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "In war there are casualties. The Wakefield girls became enemy combatants the moment they stole classified documents with the intent to expose them. William Grant was a patriot who understood the necessity of what had to be done. And while I choose to exit on my own terms rather than subject myself to the indignity of a show trial, understand this, I am not the only one who protected these secrets. There are others, still in positions of authority, who will ensure this matter never sees the light of day." The investigation didn't end with Drayson's death. His final threat prompted the task force to dig deeper into current government officials with connections to Project Nightshade or subsequent chemical weapons programs. 2 senior military officers and a deputy secretary of defense were eventually identified as having assisted in the decades-long cover-up, leading to resignations and federal charges. More significantly, the Environmental Protection Agency launched a comprehensive assessment of the Cromwell River watershed, finally confronting the toxic legacy of Millbrook Mill's secret operations. Initial findings confirmed what many in Oakwood Falls had suspected for years: the town had been slowly poisoned for decades, with cancer rates 340% above national averages in the neighborhoods closest to the contaminated water sources. A class action lawsuit against Drayson Strategic Solutions and the federal government was certified in federal court, representing hundreds of current and former Oakwood Falls residents affected by the contamination. While financial compensation could never truly address the harm done, the lawsuit forced the allocation of substantial resources for environmental remediation and healthcare for affected families. For Detective Ortiz, however, the most meaningful outcome was the long-delayed justice for Ellie and Emma Wakefield. With their remains finally recovered and the truth of their murders exposed, the twins were laid to rest in a public ceremony attended by hundreds of Oakwood Falls residents. Their grave markers, side by side in the town cemetery, bore an epitaph suggested by Harold Powell: "They found the truth, and the truth set them free." The Wakefield house on Sycamore Lane, its dark secrets finally exposed, could not escape its haunted reputation. After the investigation concluded, the Carpenter family chose not to return, accepting a generous offer from a historical preservation society that converted the property into a small museum documenting both the twins' story and the larger environmental crime that had affected the community. One room in this museum held particular significance: the twins' bedroom, restored to its 1991 appearance based on family photographs. There, behind glass, visitors could see the purple notebooks, matching teddy bears and swim trophies that told the story of 2 young lives cut tragically short. A plaque beside the display bore their school photographs and a simple message: "Some secrets refuse to stay buried." 6 months after the conclusion of the active investigation, Detective Ortiz visited Harold Powell at his home. The former detective, now dealing with advancing Parkinson's disease that some doctors suggested might be linked to his own decades of exposure to Cromwell River water, sat in his favorite armchair beside a window overlooking his small garden. "I brought something I thought you should see," Ortiz said, placing a manila folder on the side table. The final forensic report on the metal box from the mill. They found a partial fingerprint they couldn't identify during the initial examination. Now they have a match. Powell opened the folder with trembling hands, his eyes widening at the name printed on the report: Catherine Wakefield. But that would mean she knew, Ortiz confirmed. Maybe not everything, but something. Her fingerprint was on documents dated February 1983, months before the twins found the box. She must have discovered evidence of the contamination back then, maybe through Robert's photography work at the mill. But she never said anything, Powell murmured, trying to process this new information. Not even after her daughters disappeared. Fear is powerful, Ortiz replied softly. Whatever she knew frightened her enough to stay silent even after losing her children. The note she left for her sister suggests she and Robert made the connection after the girls vanished. But by then, what could they do? Grieving parents against a conspiracy that reached into the military and federal government. Powell nodded slowly, returning the report to its folder. And now, do we tell the world Catherine knew something before her daughters stumbled onto the same secret? Ortiz considered the question carefully before responding. I don't think we need to. The twins are the heroes of this story. Two 16-year-old girls brave enough to stand up for the truth when adults around them wouldn't. Let them keep that legacy. Catherine carried enough guilt to her grave. As Ortiz prepared to leave, Powell called her back with a final question that had lingered throughout the investigation. The bodies, Leanne, how did we miss them in 1991? Even with that hidden compartment, the dogs should have detected something. I have been thinking about that, she replied, pausing in the doorway. The mill was producing chemical weapons components, specialized containment technologies. What if Grant had access to materials that could temporarily mask organic decomposition from detection? It wouldn't have needed to work forever, just long enough for the initial searches to conclude. Powell's expression suggested this theory made terrible sense. All those resources, that expertise, turned toward hiding the murder of two teenage girls. What kind of world do we live in? A better one, now that the truth is out, she answered simply. Get some rest, Harold. You have earned it. As Detective Ortiz drove away from Powell's modest home, her phone rang with a call from the task force coordinator. A new testing method had identified previously undetectable chemical markers in soil samples from across Oakwood Falls, dramatically expanding the known contamination zone. Thousands more people than initially estimated had likely been exposed to Project Nightshade's toxic legacy. The Wakefield twins' final act of their determination to expose the truth regardless of personal risk continued to ripple outward, bringing long-delayed justice and accountability to a community that had suffered in silence for decades. The price of that truth had been unimaginably high, but as Ortiz had told Powell, the world was better for it. 3 days after this conversation, Harold Powell passed away peacefully in his sleep. At his funeral, former colleagues and community members gathered to honor the detective who had never stopped seeking justice for the Wakefield twins. Detective Ortiz delivered a eulogy that captured both the man and the case that had defined his career. Harold used to say that cold cases are never truly cold as long as someone remembers. For 33 years, he remembered Ellie and Emma Wakefield when others would have preferred to forget. He carried their memory through decades of dead ends and disappointments, never surrendering to the comfortable fiction that some mysteries can't be solved. In doing so, he taught all of us that the passage of time doesn't diminish our obligation to the truth. It only makes that obligation more sacred. As summer returned to Oakwood Falls in 2025, the town began a slow process of healing. Environmental remediation crews worked along the Cromwell River, removing decades of contaminated soil. Medical monitoring programs were established for current and former residents. The abandoned Millbrook Mill, that epicenter of secrets, was finally demolished, its toxic remains properly contained and removed. And in the small museum that had once been the Wakefield home, visitors paused before a display case containing 2 purple backpacks and a yellow disposable camera, silent witnesses to a crime that had taken 33 years to solve. Beside them lay open notebooks filled with a teenager's careful handwriting, the final entry still unfinished, its abrupt ending a reminder of lives cut short. But it was the photograph beside this display that often moved visitors to tears. Catherine and Robert Wakefield, arms around their identical daughters, all four smiling beneath summer sunshine in a moment captured months before tragedy struck. Below this image was a quote from Ellie's journal, words that had proven prophetic despite the decades that passed before their fulfillment. Emma says truth is like water. It always finds a way out, no matter how many barriers you put in its path. I hope she's right. I hope the truth about this town, about what they did to our water and our people, eventually comes to light. And if something happens to us for finding it, I hope someone else will be brave enough to finish what we started. In the end, many had found the courage to finish what the Wakefield twins began from Detective Powell's decades of quiet persistence to Detective Ortiz's willingness to confront powerful forces, from the anonymous whistleblowers who had provided crucial evidence to the environmental scientists who finally mapped the full extent of the contamination. Together they had fulfilled Ellie Wakefield's final hope, bringing truth to light after 33 years of darkness. Some secrets refuse to stay buried, and sometimes, as Oakwood Falls discovered, that's exactly as it should be.